be here.
Hey, good evening, ladies and gentle drunks. My name is Kevin Olson. I'm a recovered alcoholic. I would like to welcome you all to the fourth dimension. Big book study, that is. I'm glad you guys are all here. I know I'm glad I'm here. I never feel more alive than when I am sharing God's message of recovery in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that I discovered in a book called Alcoholics Anonymous. And let's share that book together tonight, shall we? As we always do, let's begin with the set-aside prayer. Goes a little something like this. Sing along if you know the words. God, please help me to set aside everything I think I know about you, about me, about my fellow man, about the 12 steps, and please allow me to gain a fresh new vision, perspective, and understanding of what you, what me, what my fellow man, and the 12 steps are all about. Amen. And as this is the fourth dimension big book study, I always like to read the two parts of our book that refer to the fourth dimension. So first of all, on page 8, Bill Wilson writes that I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. And then on page 25, bear with me for a moment. On page 25, Bill Wilson writes that we have found much of heaven and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. All right, brothers and sisters, we're going to be catapulted. We're going to be rocketed. Even Maggie's going to do it tonight. Yeah. And for the sake of the tradition and custom of the fourth dimension big book study, everyone who would, please put one hand up like this. Everybody put another hand up like this. And everybody go, oh, yeah. All right. As always, I'm going to have fun tonight. I hope you guys will have fun tonight. It's entirely optional, but it's highly recommended. We absolutely insist on enjoying life. We are not a glum lot here in Alcoholics Anonymous. So glad to have you all here. Glad to see some old faces. Glad to see some new faces. I want to welcome Victor to the study tonight. Great to see you, Vic. And I suspect we'll have some more people joining tonight. But I'm pumped, man. I'm pumped. Tonight is, to me, one of the most beautiful parts of our book. And really, it's one of the transformational keystones of the human race, I believe, and what we're going to read tonight. I think it is one of the most historically significant moments, one of the most significantly historical moments, significantly important historical moments, certainly in the 20th century, if not from the dawn of time. And that is where a hopeless alcoholic named Bill Wilson is, for the first time ever, exposed to the solution in Alcoholics Anonymous, and not just the solution. He's exposed to the program of action that any of us can take to get connected to a solution to solve our problem. Okay. And we're going to get into that a little bit so in Bill's story, we read through it last week, and what we really read, guys, was the story of a man who suffers from the disease of alcoholism. And as we have learned, the disease of alcoholism is a cycle. And that cycle is given to us by a man named Dr. William D. Silkworth in the chapter, The Doctor's Opinion. Okay. And Bill's story is really the story of a man who has this disease. He has this problem. Okay. We've talked about coming up with stories from our own life that match this cycle. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. And then if you guys are open to it, I would love to hear a couple more cycle stories from you guys, stories from your own life that match this cycle. Because again, remember, this is how we're qualifying ourselves as alcoholics. It's also the tool that I use to qualify my sponsees as alcoholics. And it's how, by telling these stories, when we get to step 12, we're making that transition from being takers in AA to being givers in AA. Remember, that's the transition we all need to make from being takers to being givers. When we get to step 12 and we start giving back to AA, it's by telling these cycle stories. Because we're properly armed with facts about ourselves, we can generally win the confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Okay. And I believe it's from telling these stories specifically, okay, that let other alcoholics know not just that we drink the same way that they drink, but that we think the same way that they think and we feel the same way that they feel. My grand sponsor Clancy would say that all the time about his sponsor Bob. His first sponsor Bob was the first man that he believed that knew the way that he felt, not the way that he necessarily drank, but the way that he felt. Okay, and how important that is for us to share with one another. So how do we craft these stories for ourselves? I want to come up with a time where I made the firm resolution and swore off, that's it, I'm done, I'm never going to drink again. Sang the alcoholic national anthem, I'm never going to drink again. We all know the song, we all know the story. Every person on this call, I know, every person at this meeting right now has said those magic words and failed. Because if I could just say those magic words and stay well, and get sober and never drink again, then I would just be at home on the couch eating M&Ms, watching Netflix, just not drinking. Okay? Swearing off and just not drinking. My problem is that I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol, yes, but I also have an abnormal reaction to sobriety. Okay? So I get sober and I become what Dr. Silkworth calls restless, irritable, and discontent in sobriety. I'm not restless, irritable, and discontent. I'm not spiritually sick when I'm drinking. I'm spiritually sick in sobriety, and the pain of that, the resentment, the fear, the guilt, the shame, the regret, all of that pain warps my mind into an inability to distinguish the true from the false. I pick up the first drink. I trigger the physical allergy, what Dr. Silkworth calls the physical allergy to alcohol. I enter what the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorse with a firm resolution not to drink again. So that's what Dr. Silkworth tells us. That's the disease of alcoholism as he gave it to us. We're going to finish the story of Bill Wilson tonight, who is a man that had this cycle going on in him. Okay. And we saw many times last week, Bill would swear off, I'm never going to drink again. And shortly afterward, he would be drunk again. Okay. Filled with the guilt, the shame, the remorse, the restlessness, irritability, and discontent in sobriety would compel him. It was necessary for him to drink to overcome that terrible feeling in sobriety, okay? And so before we get into the rest of Bill's story and before we begin to discover the solution that Ebby Thatcher brings to Bill Wilson, I would love to hear a couple of cycle stories from your end, guys. Is anybody feeling brave? Anyone want to volunteer to tell a cycle story tonight? A time that you swore off, okay, swore off completely, became emotionally bankrupt in sobriety, restless, irritable, a discontent, had an insane thought that triggered this belief that I can pick up a drink, it's going to be fine. Taking the drink, trigger the allergy, and we're gone. Kush, would you like to give it a shot? And in the meantime, I'm going to turn on a light. I'm in a hotel room in Denver, Colorado right now, and the shadows are weird. But Kush, you go ahead, please.
Hi there. My name's Kush. Not the first time back to my rooms. It's the many time. It's my third day of sobriety. I, like yourself, I'm in a hotel room for reasons of my own. Anyway, what I want to say is, yeah, I understand insanity, that whole idea of like moving to a position where you now understand that you want to make a difference, you want to change what's going wrong with you, because I now see myself as a person who are making those choices. Like a good example is I have a knee injury. I didn't have to go into work on this Wednesday and Thursday coming, but I chose to. Why did I choose to do that? Is because I had a social event. Why did I choose to go to the social event? Is because I had a chance to drink. Now I look back at myself and where's that insanity? Where's that sanity? Sanity was like, I have a knee injury. I don't have to go in. I had done all the work to make sure I didn't have to go in. But insanity came in. Yeah, but maybe I should go in because some of the new people want to see me there. And in the reality of it was just that obsession of me wanting to get that drink, wanting to, plan in advance to do what I wanted to do and let my free will run riot. And then when shit went to falls like it would have, I had then the opportunity to say, oh no, but I went in with a bad knee. I can have all these excuses when in reality, the insanity was me planning it weeks in advance. So I understand that, like, that initial part of the cycle. In fact, I am in that initial part of the cycle where you don't get to go back around, where you just keep coming back to that entrance point and saying, I've had enough, and I keep saying it. And so hopefully it's the final time I'm saying I've had enough, but I'd like to just give my story to say that is that initial part of the cycle you mentioned. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, Kush, I think that was very good. And for being, round of applause for Kush. First of all, round of applause. Great job, Kush. Great job. And at 3 days sober, that takes some guts, man. That takes some guts, Kush. So let me see if I can even summarize it, help you with just think of it as just bullet points. Okay. So first of all, at some point you swore off, right? I'm going to get sober. I'm not going to drink anymore, right?
Yep.
And you're sitting at home alone with a busted leg. Okay. Now, if you're anything like me, you're feeling sorry for yourself. You're feeling resentful that this has happened to you. Why, poor me. Why are these things always happening to me? And then there was a social event at work and you had a thought. Okay. You had a thought that, like, well, maybe I'll just go into work and, like, maybe I'll just have a few drinks at this social event at work. Now, from everyone else in this call's perspective, from the outside looking in, raise your hand if you think that sounds completely insane that Kush would have that thought. Yeah. Okay. From the outside looking in, it's completely insane. But when I'm sitting at home alone with a busted leg, feeling sorry for myself, it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. It's a bad idea until suddenly.
It's a great idea.
It's a great idea. That, brothers and sisters, is the insanity of alcohol. I used to think the insanity, and Joe, I see your hand up, and I want you to take a turn as well. I used to think the insanity, guys, was the insane things that we did while I was drinking. That's the insanity of alcoholism, isn't it? Wrong.
It's all the choices before that single drink.
It's the insane thought that precedes the first drink. Now, in a couple weeks, we're going to get into a chapter called More About Alcoholism. And we're going to see Bill Wilson describes this in a bunch of different ways. Mental obsession, the peculiar mental twist, the curious mental blank spot, the illusion, the delusion. Okay. But in all these cases, he's using some fancy words, but it's always the same thing. The insanity of alcoholism is the insane thought that precedes the first drink. In step 2, when we say came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, at its simplest level in Alcoholics Anonymous, what we mean is that God will help me. God, being all powerful and all truth and all pure honesty, is going to be able to help me to distinguish the true from the false. God is going to help me to be able to see the reality of that first drink. And I can't see it on my own. Okay. I have no willpower where it comes to picking up that first drink. Joe, you want to take a turn? You want to give it a shot?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's interesting what you said when you mentioned that it's not really insane whatever you do when you're drunk or using, but it is insane what you do when you're sober. Because, whatever you do when you're drinking is, you're fucked up. So it's one of those things where nothing's really going to make sense. But when you're totally sober, I mean, I find that anytime that I quit, there's this extreme motivation that I'll have for a week and a half that is like a real spark. It's a real ember. And it'll just slowly die off and die off and die off until at some point, like no matter what is going on, I'll find something in my life to start as a justification to start using, whether that be, like feeling bad or feeling good, or even leaving things untreated until they become big enough so that I can use it as an excuse to use. And it happens literally every time, and it's insane to not do anything about it.
And our book says, man, and we'll read this in a couple of weeks, we will find some insanely trivial excuse as a reason to pick up that first drink. One of the craziest things is we'll see someone who will have a friend that has overdosed, okay, and passed away. And I've seen people use the pain of someone that they're close to overdosing and dying as an excuse for them to go out and use. What could be more insane than that? And yet, somehow that makes sense. And there's a level of understanding to every person on this call. If you are a real alcoholic, you understand how we could, with that distorted thinking and that distorted feeling and emotion that compels us to have these insane thoughts, because I got to get relief. I got to get relief from the pain that I'm in. Okay. And you mentioned even something good happening. It's like, even when something's good happening, I'm just looking for any excuse to go out. Why? Because deep within me is still all that terrible pain and darkness and resentment and fear and all that stuff. Okay. So to that point, excellent job. Round of applause for Joe. Excellent job, Joe. Excellent job, Kush. Joe, I'm glad to see you. I know Andy sent you to come to the study tonight, so I'm glad you joined.
Thanks, man.
Now,
Appreciate
guys,
it.
yeah. So speaking of a person sitting with terrible darkness and pain within them, let's go back to the story of our intrepid co-founder, Bill Wilson. We're going to be on page 8, brothers and sisters. Brad, my man Brad is here. Will you read for us tonight, Brad?
I would love to.
Okay, guys. So let's start on, we're on page 8. We're going to go trembling. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital, a broken man. This is Bill Wilson stepping out of the town's hospital. I believe this would be, Rob, is this September 1934? September is the 3rd time that he went, and then he went again in December, right? He went once in 1933, then I think it was July, September, and then he'll go back again in November. So he's stepping out of the hospital, and this is September 1934. Back to you, Brad.
Hey, everybody. Brad Sillito, recovered alcoholic.
Hi, Brad.
Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And on Armistice Day, 1934, I was off again.
Okay, so remember, so we're talking about what was Bill's excuse? What was Bill's reasoning? I don't know this for sure, but I bet you anything. Bill was a World War I veteran. What day does he start drinking? Armistice Day, which we call Remembrance Day. I bet you anything he was using some memory from the war, or I lost my friends, or no one understands what it was like for us in the war. Some level of self-pity and resentment combined on Armistice Day as an insane excuse for him to pick up the first drink. I see some nodding heads. You guys know what I'm talking about there? That's just a guess. I don't know that for sure, but that's how I am. So that's why I think that. Anyway, back to you, Brad.
I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or I would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the 4th dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes.
Okay, so now keep in mind, it was Armistice Day, so it's November 11th. 1934, Bill Wilson starts drinking again. Now it's the end of November, so he's been drinking straight, okay, for that entire time. Now, like, it's almost 3 weeks straight that Bill Wilson is drinking again, and this is after being trying to get himself sober. He's been in the town's hospital 3 times now. He's getting out, and we're about to see now. Bill says how dark it is before the dawn, okay? And Bill Wilson is about to have the solution to his problem, your problem and my problem, delivered to him by an old school friend by the name of Ebby Thatcher. And as I said, I think that this is one of the most important moments in really the history of the 20th century, and certainly a transformational moment for Bill Wilson. It's a transformational moment in the life of any alcoholic, because right here, we're going to see come into the same frame for the first time ever in the history of the world. We're going to see the problem, solution, and the program of action all collapse into the same frame for the first time, okay? At this point, what does Bill Wilson know? All that Bill Wilson knows is the problem. Bill knows what the cycle is. Okay. And we talked about this last week. Self-knowledge is not enough. Me coming to the Big Book Study and learning what the cycle is and knowing what those stories are, that is not a solution to alcoholism. Although it can feel incredibly affirming and validating that, man, for the first time, somebody really understands. This guy, Dr. Silkworth, came up after working with all these hundreds of alcoholics. He developed this disease concept, and man, that's me. I get it. It feels like we found a solution, but we have not, brothers and sisters. We have learned all about our problem, but that is not the same thing as a solution, and it is certainly not the same thing as a program of action. So, very quickly, we're going to remember Roland Hazard goes to Vienna to work with Dr. Carl Jung to find a solution to his alcoholism. You can go read this on page 27 in our book. Carl Jung says to him, Roland, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. There's only one solution for you, and that is a vital spiritual experience. Roland Hazard comes back to the United States and gets involved with a group called the Oxford Group at that time, which was started by a guy named Dr. Frank Buchmann, who was a minister who wanted to get back to what he called first century Christian values. And he developed this program of action. Okay, simple actions that any person can take to affect a spiritual experience that can overcome this alcoholic problem that we have. At base, and you can look at page 263 in our book. At base, it can really be summarized as kind of 4 steps: surrender, confession, restitution, and service. And the Oxford Group believed that anyone who would take those actions and do those actions could have a deeper experience, a deeper spiritual experience. Roland Hazard came back to the United States, started working with the Oxford Group, and we're going to read a little bit more history here about how Roland Hazard brought that message to Ebby Thatcher, an old school friend of his, and now Ebby Thatcher is going to bring that same message to Bill Wilson. Okay? Brad, back to you.
Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected that there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through the night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober.
This is Ebby Thatcher, guys. This is Bill Wilson now is telling the story about how Ebby Thatcher came to his house and carried this message to him. And I'm going to fill in a few more of the blanks on the history here in a little bit.
It was years since I could remember him coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a JAG. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. The door opened and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened?
Okay, guys, I just want to say that is a line I quote a lot in our book, and I love that line, man. I love the idea that Ebby Thatcher now he's just standing at the door. He hasn't said anything yet to Bill, but this is a guy that Bill used to drink with, and he can tell immediately that there is something going on with this guy, and he hasn't even said a word. Okay. I'm a big believer that God walks, talks, and shakes hands in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And sometimes the most important thing I can do with a newcomer is shake their hand and smile and make them feel warm and welcome, that they understand that there's something going on here. Because I'll tell you what, brothers and sisters, I did not get AA the first time, man. I went in and out for years. And I know I see some friends on this call that are still going through that same thing, or maybe wondering like, what's going on. And I've been there. I've been there, in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay. And the thing that I could never get out of my head, maybe I didn't remember the steps or the book or what that speaker said, but the thing that haunted me when I was out drinking again after being in AA was the warmth and the smiles and the laughter. That is what haunted me. That I knew there was a better way. I knew that those people in AA had something, and that's what I carried with me when I would go out drinking again. And that's what I could not forget, the electricity that I felt around you, and the sparkle in your eye. And Bill Wilson now is seeing it for the first time. Ebby Thatcher is speaking the language of the heart to Bill Wilson, and he hasn't even used a word. St. Francis of Assisi has a great saying. He says, preach the gospel, use words when necessary. I love that saying. Preach the gospel, use words when necessary. Okay. Ebby Thatcher right now is carrying this message. There's something in his eyes. When recovery hits someone, we can see it all over them. I think in particular, step 5, when someone does a step 5, there is often like a tangible physical change you can see in them. And when this thing kicks off in people, I even have sponsees. I've got a sponsee on this call right now. I can see him from here. Okay. And he's about 5 years sober. He's 5 years sober, but we started working together a little while ago, going through this work. We did a step 4 and a 5, and it's been transformational watching what's happened in this guy. Okay. Even at 5 years after a drink, there was still that much room for improvement. And this guy's lit up. You can see it all over him. Okay. It's an incredible thing. It's an incredible way of life. The other thing I want to say about this and how important it is that Ebby has gone back to talk to Bill is because Ebby is someone that Bill used to drink with. Okay. And a lot of times I'll hear people say when they're talking about step 9 and going to make amends to that old drug dealer, going to make amends to that old drinking buddy. Well, I don't want to put myself in a dangerous situation, so maybe I better not do that. Man, I don't know, but our God is a little bit more powerful than that, I believe. Okay. And step 10 tells us that we have been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We can go, it says in chapter Working with Others, we can go to the most sordid spots on earth if we are protected, if we're spiritually fit, okay? And sometimes, in my experience, going back and making amends to people that I used to use and drink with carries an incredibly powerful message to them when they can see what has happened in our lives as a result of this miraculous program, okay? The miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm not telling you go hang out with your old drinking buddies, okay? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying don't rule out going to make amends to them because you might be in danger. In fact, you can a twofold opportunity to make an amend, yes, and also sometimes to carry a very, very powerful message of recovery because they're people that we used to drink and use with, just like Ebby Thatcher now is carrying this message to Bill Wilson simply by showing up fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He is inexplicably different. Back to you, Brad.
I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me, simply but smilingly. He said, I've got religion.
Okay, so guys, when he says, I've got religion, please don't freak out, okay? Stay with us. Don't run away, okay? Stay with us. All that he means is that Roland Hazard came and carried a message to him about this Oxford group. Okay. And the Oxford group was a Christian organization. There's no way around that. Alcoholics Anonymous came out of this Christian organization called the Oxford group that gave us this program of action, surrender, confession, restitution, and service. Okay. We have taken that program of action, but we are not a religious organization. At this time, they still were. AA didn't exist at this time. This is not AA. This is a guy named Ebby Thatcher who became part of the Oxford group. We became known as the drunk squad of the Oxford group prior to separating off as Alcoholics Anonymous separately, which happened around 1937 is when we started. So Dr. Bob gets sober June 10th, 1935. Between 1935 and 1937, we were still the drunk squad of the Oxford group. Around 1937, we started to separate off. Really in Cleveland is where it started to happen, to become our own thing separately. And Alcoholics Anonymous was really galvanized in April 10th, 1939 with the publishing of our book. So don't freak out. All that Ebby Thatcher means is that he's been participating in Oxford group meetings, doing this program of action, getting connected to the solution that has overcome his problem. Bill Wilson pushes a drink his side and he pushes it away. Okay, back to you, Brad.
I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right. But bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked.
Okay, so here's this is the history of it. Ebby Thatcher is arrested in the state of Vermont for his third DUI. He gets 3 DUIs, okay? And in the state of Vermont at that time, you get your third DUI, you go directly to jail. Okay, that's the way the laws were. I think it's a little harsh myself, but anyway, that's the way the laws were then. Okay, but so Ebby gets this third DUI, and remember, Bill Wilson said rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. Okay, well, he almost was. And what happened is Ebby Thatcher was standing in front of the judge, and 2 men showed up. 2 men named Seba Graves and Shep Cornell from the Oxford group came, and they saw Ebby. They saw what was happening to Ebby. Ebby actually spent that weekend in jail, and the following Monday, they brought Roland Hazard with them. Why did they bring Roland Hazard with them? Because Roland Hazard was a rich, well-to-do guy whose father was friends with the judge, and they convinced the judge to suspend Ebby's commitment. Okay, so Ebby Thatcher did not have to go to jail. He was given to, and the judge said, only for you, Roland, will I do this. If it was anyone else, I wouldn't do this, but I know you and I know your father, and so I'm going to let this man go. Okay, and what did they show Ebby? They showed Ebby a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. The simple religious idea is our step 2. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That's the simple religious idea. The practical program of action is the remaining 12 steps. We take a program of action to get connected to a solution, the spiritual awakening, the vital spiritual experience, which overcomes our alcoholic insanity. We have a program of action to get us connected to a solution that allows us to recover from the necessity to have to drink, okay? And that's what Ebby Thatcher now is bringing to Bill Wilson. But now consider this. What piece of information does Ebby Thatcher not have? What does he not fully know? He does not fully understand the depth of his problem. He does not know the cycle of alcoholism. We get that from Dr. Silkworth. So Bill Wilson, in this moment, becomes the first person in the history of the world to have access to all 3 pieces of information that I need as an alcoholic to get sober. I need to know what my problem is. I need to know what the solution is, a power greater than myself, a higher power, God, if you can tolerate that word. Which if you can't is okay, I get it, I understand, I couldn't either. And then a program of action to get connected to that power to overcome the problem. So Bill Wilson is not more smarter than us. Bill Wilson is not more spiritual than any of us. He is not God's special little chosen snowflake. Bill Wilson is just the first person in the history of the world to have access to all 3 pieces of information. And he gets it when Ebby Thatcher comes and gives him the solution, the program of action, and he can pair that up with the problem, and now our program can exist, and you and I have a way out of this insidious disease. Okay, back to you, Brad.
He had come to pass his experience along to me if I cared to have it. I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays, way over there on the hillside. There was that proffered temperance pledge I never signed, my grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings, his insistence that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. This fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died, these recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. That wartime day in Old Winchester Cathedral came back again. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation. But that was as far as I had gone.
Okay, guys, so what's happening here is Bill Wilson is thinking, okay? And thinking is never a good thing for alcoholics, okay? And Bill is pontificating on what he likes about God and what he doesn't like about God. And like picture this, okay? Bill Wilson is right now, he's sitting in his kitchen. He's got probably like a week's growth of beard. He's sitting in a natty old dirty bathrobe, probably burned with cigarette butts, okay? Drinking bathtub gin, pontificating about God to Ebby, okay? About what he likes, my grandfather and the chicanery and what I saw in World War I. Oh, Ebby, what about God? The point, by the way, where it says the spheres really had their music. It's an old thing from Greek mythology. They believed that the planets rotating actually made a sound, and it was like this celestial orchestra. Like these are the things that Bill Wilson is talking about right now, okay? And Ebby is gonna listen and tolerate it as long as he can. Just like my sponsors would listen and tolerate my nonsense as long as they could, and then they smashed me with Alcoholics Anonymous simplicity. And Ebby Thatcher is going to give Bill Wilson here what I love to call the 1-2 punch. Okay. And we're going to see it. And you'll see when it happens. I'll point it out when it happens. But the simplicity of spirituality in Alcoholics Anonymous is what allowed self-proclaimed intellectual like myself, like Bill Wilson, to get sober. We often say, and I think it's totally true, no one was ever so stupid they could never get Alcoholics Anonymous. But there's a lot of people who think their way right out of AA. And that's what Bill Wilson is doing now. And he's going to go on and on about what he thinks and what he likes and what he doesn't like and so on and so forth. In step 2, people really, we think that we're going to talk about God and like what I believe. And, I really need to understand God and no, it's very simple. The question I need to answer in step 2 is very simple. And we're going to see the moment that Bill Wilson takes step 2. And we're going to see how simple it is. The simplicity of spirituality in Alcoholics Anonymous is what allowed a guy like me, and maybe you, to get sober. Okay. Brad, keep reading for us, please.
With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated, and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a good man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. The wars which had been fought, the burnings, and the chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. But
Okay, now, and Ebby couldn't take it anymore. Listening to all that stuff, Ebby now is going to interject, and he's going to hit him with the first punch of AA simplicity. Okay, but my friend sat before me and he made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. Boom. Okay, and we're going to see what happens to Bill Wilson here in a minute. So Ebby hits him with punch number one. Boom. God did for me what I could not do for myself.
his human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute. And this was none at all. That floored me. It began to
Boom. That floors Bill. Okay, one punch. Boom. He's knocked right to the canvas. He's floored by this. Okay, the simplicity of spirituality in Alcoholics Anonymous floors Bill Wilson.
It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice.
Okay, so here's Bill Wilson now getting up off the canvas, trying to fight again. Okay, he's coming back. He's coming back. But Ebby's going to give him the second punch here in a minute. We'll see what happens.
The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conception as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way.
Now, Ebby Thatcher right now is going to give him the knockout punch. And this was the knockout punch for me in Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous does not ask me to believe in any one particular brand of God. And I don't know anywhere else in the world that gives us that kind of freedom. Okay? You show me anywhere else in the world where they don't want you to believe in their very specific brand of God. Okay, whether it be Judaism or Christianity or Islam or Buddhism, they want you to believe they're open arms, but we want you to believe what we believe. And in AA, we are given freedom. And Ebby Thatcher is going to knock out Bill Wilson with the simplicity of the freedom of spirituality in Alcoholics Anonymous right now.
My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, "Why don't you choose your own conception of God?" That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning.
All right, guys, that's step two. That is Bill Wilson taking step two right there. We saw him take step one last week. Now he is taking step two. When we get to the chapter, We Agnostics, I'm going to reference back to this page, okay, to page 12, because the question, the first step two proposition that we need to ask, do I believe, or am I even willing to believe there is a power greater than myself? Bill Wilson has learned here that it is only a matter of being willing to believe. Nothing more was required for him to make his beginning. And suddenly, the door of spirituality opened just wide enough for a guy like Bill Wilson and a guy like me and maybe you to be able to get through that door.
I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Thus, I was convinced that God is that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last, I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. And so it had been ever since. How blind I had been.
Okay, I want you guys to make a little note there in that particular line. I want you to write step 4. Okay, and we're going to come back to this when we get into step 4. Okay, because step 4 talks about being blocked from the sunlight of the Spirit, and this is the great paradox that we all suffer from when we get to steps 2 and 3. It's that we've come to believe, we're willing to believe, we want this thing to happen, but just like Bill Wilson, we can feel that effect for a small period of time, but then the sense of his presence will be blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. And the purpose of Alcoholics Anonymous and the rest of the remaining steps is to clear away those worldly clamors that are blocking me from the sunlight of the Spirit. Okay? Because if all I needed to do was just come to AA and just get God, then we would have a 2-step program and no one would ever relapse. But it's not that easy. Why is it not that easy? Because we experience these worldly clamors. And I know people on this call right now. Someone called me yesterday who's on this call right now who's experiencing some of those worldly clamors within themselves. And they're feeling blocked from the sense of God's presence in their life. And that's the purpose of the remaining steps. So when we get to step 4 in particular, I'm going to refer to this, okay? Because that's the deal, man. I like to think of God as the great Wi-Fi in the sky. Okay, we all know what it's like to be in a situation where we're trying to get online, but we can't get connected to the power. Okay, we can't log in. And what's the issue? Is the issue that the power's not there? No, the issue is that I need to change something about my connection to the power. And that's the purpose of AA, to clear away these worldly clamors within myself that are blocking me from the sense of his presence. Does that make sense, you guys? Yeah? Thumbs up? Yeah? Makes sense? Yeah? All right. Good stuff. Back to you, Brad.
At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away root and branch. I have not had a drink since.
Okay, so what we're seeing right now, this is Bill Wilson doing the program of action, okay? He's back in the hospital now. December 11th, 1934, Bill Wilson goes back to the town's hospital. I have a picture of the actual admission slip of Bill Wilson going back into the town's hospital to work with Dr. Silkworth. Ebby Thatcher now is coming to him to do this work with Bill. Now, don't be confused, though. When it says, I ruthlessly faced my sins, became willing to have my newfound friend, that's capital F on friend. What does that mean? That means he's talking about God, okay? So we're seeing Bill right now, and the way that Bill lays them out in his story is not necessarily sequential. What we really see there is Bill kind of taking step 3 and then 6 and 7, asking God to remove these defects from him. Now, in the next paragraph, it says, my schoolmate visited me. So this is Ebby Thatcher now. And he acquaints himself with his problems and his deficiencies. Steps 4 and 5, I made a list of people I had hurt toward whom I felt resentment. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrongs. Steps 8 and 9. Never was I to be critical of them in all such matters. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability. Steps 8 and 9. I was to test my thinking with a new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Steps 10 and 11. Never was I to pray for myself except as my requests bore my usefulness to others, then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. Giving back to others, step 12. Okay? Booyah! Rock and roll. So now, my friend promised. This is Ebby Thatcher promising this to Bill Wilson.
My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a new way of living which answered all of my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light, who presided over us all.
Okay, in the next paragraph, we're going to see this is kind of a famous and very notable moment in Alcoholics Anonymous. You will often hear people refer to Bill Wilson's spiritual experience that he has in the town's hospital. Bill Wilson has an actual white light, burning bush, sincere spiritual enlightenment happened to him in the town's hospital. And what I like to point out is that when does this happen to Bill? This happens to him after he has done the 12 steps. He has done the steps to the best of his ability in the hospital. As a result of doing that work, now he gets the results. Okay? First comes the action, then comes the understanding, not the other way around. Okay? And that's how I want it to be. Give it to me first, and then I'll do the work. Okay? And it doesn't work that way, man. Life is not that way. I need to do the work, then I get the results. And now we're going to see what happens to Bill here in the hospital.
These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up, as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. For a moment I was alarmed and called my friend, the doctor, to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you I don't understand, but you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The good doctor now sees many men who have such experiences. He knows that they are real. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They, in turn, might work with others. My friend has emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate, for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going. We commenced.
Okay, you guys, I just want to highlight how important this is. Okay, so we heard the line, first of all, faith without works is dead. And my first sponsor, David, used to say that faith with works is alive. Okay, faith with works is life. And Bill Wilson believed that his spiritual experience that he had was directly related to a calling that he had to carry this message to other alcoholics. And I believe that Bill Wilson was divinely inspired to bring this program to life. Okay. And he did. And he began working with other alcoholics immediately. It says he was plagued with waves of self-pity and resentment. Raise your hand if you identify with that. Anyone here ever been plagued with waves of self-pity and resentment? Absolutely. And what is the antidote? You know, I was just talking to someone else, another one of my sponsees, right before this call. And the same solution for my sponsee is the same solution that I need. That when I am working with another alcoholic and I'm thinking about their life, I am not obsessed with my own life. When I am thinking about them, I am not thinking about me. And Bill Wilson said, destruction of self-centeredness is the price that must be paid. Well, we can overcome self-centeredness through all of the work of the steps, clearing away those worldly clamors and having this profound spiritual experience. That is real. But I'm here to tell you guys, I don't feel that way all the time. Okay? There are a lot of times when those waves of self-pity and resentment are crashing over Kevin, and he's in his little rowboat wondering, like, what's going to happen to little old me? Okay? Filled with fear and resentment and self-pity and all that stuff. I have discovered what Bill Wilson has discovered, what I talked to my sponsee about earlier today, that I will say to all of you. The antidote, the absolute weapon against self-centeredness and self-centered fear and self-centered self-pity and resentment is to go care about someone else in Alcoholics Anonymous. When I am concerned with someone else's suffering, I'm not obsessed with my own suffering. And isn't it the case that I'll go talk to another alcoholic and suddenly the very things that I thought were problems, when I listen to this guy's problems, suddenly my problems look like blessings, don't they? Okay, I want to tell him about, oh man, the amount of money I'm going to have to pay taxes to the Canada Revenue Agency. This guy's living in the drop-in center, okay? And suddenly I'm grateful for the things in my life, okay? And when I start working with a newcomer and someone says, you know, I want what you have, suddenly, you know what it helps me to see? It helps me to see that maybe what I have is worth wanting. And maybe I can begin to have what I want and to want what I have as well, okay? And when I'm trapped in my own head, stuck in my own suffering, my own fear, my own self-pity, it's very hard to get out of. The only way to do it is with pen and paper, inventory, doing all that, call my sponsor, get out of it. That's all fine. That's all great. But in the near term, the absolute weapon against it is to go find someone else to go be of service to go help another alcoholic, to go try and carry this message to someone else. And the other best part about it is when I'm telling my sponsee, well, maybe what you need to do is do some writing and, you know, how are you at with your prayer and meditation? And then, you know, maybe you need to start doing some service for the group. It's like, oh yeah, Kevin, okay, maybe I need to start implementing some of these tools myself, okay? So this is the magic of starting to work with others so I can overcome certain trials and low spots. That's what it says, certain trials and low spots. Alcoholics Anonymous does not shield me from life's little bullets, but it gives me a program of action that I can use when I am in the middle of the storm. And the storm, those storms are coming, okay? And I have been through storms. And I'm here to tell you that this is a design for living that works in rough going. Back to you, Brad. We'll read out to the end of the chapter, and then don't run away right away. One of my favorite things every week, everyone please stay online if you can, and we'll go around the room and everyone can introduce themselves and say hello. We've got people from all over the place signed in tonight, so I always love meeting all you guys and saying hello. And so we'll read out the chapter, we'll say the Lord's Prayer, and then we'll go around the room and everyone will have a chance to introduce themselves. Back to you, Brad.
We commenced to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown up among us, of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere, have seen the most impossible domestic situations righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. In one Western city and its environs, there are 1,000 of us and our families. We meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 persons. We are growing in number and power. At the bottom, it says in 2022, AA is composed of approximately 120,455 groups, and your books all might say something different depending when they were printed. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature.
That just means an alcoholic who's drinking. An alcoholic who's currently drinking is an unlovely creature.
Our struggles with them are variously strenuous, comic, and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see our way of life. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked at our seemingly worldliness and levity, but just underneath there is a deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. Most of us feel we need look no further for utopia. We have it with us right here and now. Each day, my friends, simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Bill W., co-founder of AA, died January 24th, 1971.
Amen. Good stuff, guys. Okay, that's it for tonight. We'll close with the Lord's Prayer. And then, as I said, everyone feel free to stick around and just introduce yourselves and let us know where you're from. I love meeting you all. All right? So let's go with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.